So when I say subscription size, it means, how many units of produce, how many heads of lettuce or bunches of kale or herbs do you want to put in one of your subscription boxes?
My name is Mia Price, and I'm the marketing lead here at the Growcer. I get to put on great webinars such as this and other events for you guys. And today I'm joined with my colleague, Nick Halverson. He is a project specialist here at the Growcer. He has helped many productive farmers like yourselves bring your projects to fruition. And we're super excited to be here today to talk about our food box subscription business and how this business model works. This is part of a workshop series, and today is the second session. So we'll really be diving into what the financials of this model look like. So what it takes to get started, what an investment looks like, your return on investment, and then additionally kind of the specifics of this model. So pricing your produce and making sure that you have everything you need to get started and get up and running. Just some key housekeeping items for today. As we've seen a bunch of you posting already, if you have any questions, at the bottom of the screen, you have a question and answer function. So be sure to use that function for posting any questions that you have, because it allows us to upvote questions for me to be able to kind of check in and see where everyone's at throughout. And then also some of our team members here at the Growcer are also joining. Will be in that question and answer function, answering any of your questions as the webinar goes on. And again, don't forget to upvote anything. So if you see any questions in there that you were thinking too, be sure to upvote it. And then for any commentary, continue to use the chat. It's a great way to be able to connect. And if you have any issues with Zoom, we'll also be having the session live on Facebook. So you can go to our Facebook, I think just Growcer on Facebook, and you're able to then watch it from there as well if you have any issues with our session Zoom. And we'll take it away from there, I guess. So to get started, our agenda for today, this is just an overview of everything that we'll be covering. But at a high level, our goal for today's session is to provide a clear financial breakdown on what this food box subscription model entails. Our agenda, as I said, is kind of everything that's covered here, but just at a higher level, we'll be doing a presentation from myself. And as I mentioned, my colleague Nick is also on the call. We'll be going through all the different aspects, and then we'll pause throughout for questions because we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page as we continue to move through, because it is a bit of information, but no need to worry there because the session is recorded, and we'll be sending the recording to everyone after the session with other key takeaways, and that includes a copy of the slides. We have a farm economics one-pager that's been put together. So it's all the information around the financials in one document. So you'll have everything. And if you have any partners that you'll be launching into this business model with, you're able to share that with them as well. And then we'll have a web page as well that will allow you to kind of see the ROI for your project that I'll get more into at the end of how to access that and what it entails. And then a feedback survey. So you can let us know how you felt about this session, what your takeaways were, and we can continue to use that information to build on this workshop series, as this is only session 2 and we have 2 more. A bit more background on Growcer. So the company was founded in 2015 after our co-founders went to Nunavut and saw the need for fresh, healthy, local produce across Canada. We now have 35 farmers across Canada, so quite an expansion from then till now, operating our modular farms as a way to provide fresh produce to their communities. And we are also now at a point where our farms have created more than 1 million servings of fresh vegetables for people across Canada. So it's great to see the project expansions and the impacts that they're having beyond just on the business models that each one of our great farmers has created, but also on an impact level in their communities. So I'm going to dive into now like the food box subscription model, specifically what does this model entail before we get into the financials of it, because we want to make sure that we're all on the same page of what exactly we're discussing today and are able to kind of take away that key information. So last week we had a great session with Carly Basler. She is the sustainability coordinator at the Churchill Northern Study Center in Churchill, Manitoba. She is our first Growcer farmer. So this is our second webinar session that we did with her, and Carly did a great job explaining their food box subscription model entitled Rocket Greens, which is on the rocket launching pad in Churchill, and how she operates her subscription, key consideration factors, how it's set up logistically, as well as kind of the financial breakdown of her boxes as well. So today we're just going to continue to build on that now that we all have that great platform. And thank you to everyone who attended and also provided us with such great feedback, which is what we have displayed on the screen here. Next week, we'll be going into the marketing and member retention aspect of creating a food box subscription model, as well as kind of the business planning. Now that we have the financials, how do we translate that into a business plan? And for the last session on the 26th, we're partnering with Local Line and we'll be focusing on the logistics. So how do we really execute this? And Local Line offers an amazing software that can really help with some of those key logistical considerations. So what is a food box subscription model? It is a direct-to-consumer subscription. So it is a type of CSA or customer-supported agriculture, community-supported agriculture, sorry, where consumers are able to purchase produce directly from those who are growing it. This is definitely growing in popularity, and there are a ton of different types. There's everything from like flowers to meat, and what we specialize on here in Growcer is produce. And they're not to be confused with meal kits because those are a bit different, where they provide like the full meal packages. It's specifically the produce that's being provided to the customers. Anyone is able to operate it, and the customers is those who are located in your local community. The advantages of applying this model with a container farm specifically are container farms are a form of controlled environment agriculture. And that means that we're able to control the environment in which produce is being grown in. We can control everything from the lights, we control the nutrients that are included in the water and the temperature within inside of our farms. That allows us to have less outside factors to contribute with and to allow us to have a more reliable yield overall. Additionally, container farming allows you to grow year round. I know for myself, I'm located here in Ottawa and it is quite chilly right now. It can make it difficult to grow produce in a continual throughout the entire year. So with container farming, all year you're able to grow. And additionally, you're able to grow a wide variety in terms of the produce, and you don't have to contend with things such as having a shoulder season or soil health, as our plants are grown hydroponically, which I'll get into more in a bit. You can also plan your crops, so you're not competing with any local farmers, or you can offer varieties that aren't typically offered within your community. Here at Growcer, we do have other business models, and we did a great webinar series back in July, which I think Stephanie can maybe share the link to in the chat, or we'll include in your follow-up email. Stephanie's another member of our Growcer team who's here today helping out. And the different other models that we offer, aside from subscription, are also wholesale. So that's when you provide all the produce to one key other location. So that would be whether it's to one like retail grocery store, an institution. For example, Acadia University grows their produce and then uses it all in their cafeteria, or whether that be a hospital, which I know some of our other farmers have done. There's a hybrid model, which is actually the one that Carly in Churchill, Manitoba employs, where it's a combination of subscription and wholesale. And then we also have impact. So those are our farms where the goal is more so to break even in terms of produce sales and go beyond in having a further impact in the community, whether that's through increased donations or education as a key component. The photo that's here on your screen today for the impact model is one of a school that has students work within their farms in order to contribute to them learning more about hydroponic growing and different methods, as well as then they can take that other side of the business and use that business knowledge in terms of setting up their subscription boxes. So a variety of different methods, but the benefits specifically of the food box option are that it allows you to have more control over your produce prices. You're the one pricing your produce, and in comparison to wholesale where you need to sell to another party and then they need to sell from there, it's just you. So there's no middle margin to worry about. You can dictate your customer experience a little bit better. So if you sell to a wholesaler or to an institution or et cetera, you are selling to them, and then how it's displayed for your end customer or any feedback that your end customer may have may not be then relayed to you. And additionally, this model is very, very easily scalable or adaptable. If you want to start growing something different or change up how you're doing things, it's your business model and you can do that as you'd like to. Do we have any questions before we just go a bit more into our farms? So we're just going to give a quick overview of the technology as that's what you'd be investing in. I'm just going to the Q&A tab. We'll get to, I can see a question here about kind of more the best practices so our produce doesn't get contaminated, and that's really great to add, and I think really important. Our team, we have a customer success team here at Growcer and also a research and development team, and they really focus on developing those best practices and then also relaying those to our customers. As I get more into our farms, I'll kind of talk about that a bit further, but previously we did a webinar back in October with a member of our research and development team, and he really dives into not only our technology, but also how we kind of relay the best practices of our technology to our customers and what some of those best practices are. So definitely take a look at our virtual farm tour for more information there. And I will dive into our farm section just quickly as an overview. So looking at our farms, they are modular hydroponic farms. They are 40 by 10-foot structures that are insulated and able to grow produce hydroponically, which means within water, not soil. So there is no soil within our farms. Our plants use deep water culture, a method in which the plants are sitting on rafts in beds of water that have nutrients in them. And as I said before, we have a virtual farm tour that we did back in October that really goes deep into the technical aspects of that there. But just to give you an overview, that's what our farms do. As you can see from these photos, our farms are optimized actually to grow leafy green produce. I'll get more into the specifics of what that entails in a minute. And we're also testing other varieties such as berries. And our farms have 216 planting slots in them, which yield about 504 plants a week. And you might be thinking, why not 2,000? And that's just because we don't advise you planting your entire farm all at once and then harvesting everything at once. We help you develop a schedule along with our customer success team so that you're able to always have plants to harvest. And especially with this subscription model, that's very important so that every week you have something to sell to your end customer. Additionally, as I said, like the virtual farm tour goes into more of the specifications around our farms, but having a rotating schedule also allows you to plant different varieties, which is great and really important when you have a subscription box, as you want to make sure you're always keeping your customers engaged there. What we can grow specifically is, as I said, leafy greens, and that includes lettuces, Asian greens, herbs, kale, spinach, brassica, and over 30 additional varieties. And we do have a cultivars guide that breaks down all of that, which we can share with you again in the emails after this webinar, so you're able to take a look at what you think would be the best fit for your community. And now that we've covered the basics, we're going to hop into the financials, and I'll pass it off to Nick. Any questions, again, please use the Q&A tab so that everyone's able to get a good background on the questions that are being asked and upvote any that you think are great. And Nick, I'll pass it off to you.
Perfect, Nia. Thank you for the good recap of sort of the business model or the concept behind the business model of a food subscription box or a CSA box, whatever you want to call it. So for, like Nia said, I'll be going into a little bit more of the financial aspect of it. So the overall farm costs, what you could expect for operating expenses, and as well as sort of what goes into setting a price for, you know, your produce and how you might want to price a box. And we've actually also created some scenarios. Again, of course, they're based on averages, but just to really give you a better understanding of what the dollars and the cents of it all look like. And then we'll also provide an opportunity at the end to maybe look a little bit more in detail about what the situation could look like for your project or your farm or your business specifically. So Nia, you can go to the next slide. So the initial investment overview. So we want to include the entire startup costs for starting a Growcer project. So it goes beyond just the farm cost itself. So the full startup cost would be, again, this is a ballpark price because of course there are some, you know, additions that we can add and some various, there's variables that go into the price, but overall it's about $270,000 Canadian for the total project. So that would be turnkey, the farm being delivered and set up on your site and you being ready to grow. So the startup cost would include the Growcer farm, which is about 210,000 Canadian, or for our American friends on the call, about 165,000 US dollars. We have a ballpark pricing for the site preparation because depending on what you already have set up or what might be available to you. There is a range that would fall in from about $5,000 to $25,000 on average, and that would be Canadian dollars. You have the installation cost for 2 grocer technicians who would actually show up on site and make sure basically that the what I call the quote unquote guts of the system, basically all the hydroponic equipment is working properly and is set up for you. Your onboarding and training, which is consists of like e-training modules as well as in-person training during that installation period. You have your growing supplies for the first year, and then the ongoing support and software for the first year. So we want to be totally upfront about what the total investment could potentially look like for starting your own farm. But to just reiterate, that farm cost itself is about $210,000 for the technology. As for your operating expenses, so we built a scenario based on some of the average prices that we've seen across our project. So based on about $20 an hour labor and about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. And as you can see, the point I think of this pie chart is to just explain that labor is a significant portion of your operating expenses. Even though the labor hours start at about 25 hours on average a week, you can tell just by looking at this that it does make up a significant portion of your ongoing costs. So the next biggest would be your utilities. So that would basically be how much you're paying, dollars per kilowatt hour to power your farm. When we say growing material, which is the next biggest, that basically is every single item that you need to grow. So seeds, fertilizer, your nutrient solution, like hair nets, your growing medium, which in our case is a rock wool that you plant your seeds in. Everything that you need to grow is included in that. And like it says up in the last slide, it's about $7,000 annually on average to have those supplies delivered to you through Growcer. And then the software subscription and support. So the software subscription both includes a remote monitoring service. So for those of you who've maybe gone through some information on the website, it basically allows you to have some peace of mind and keeping for lack of a better word, an eye in the sky on your farm. So enabling you to do some controls of it remotely or get notified maybe if the temperature is going down in the middle of the winter, or the opposite being the case maybe in the summer, as well as in tandem with that remote monitoring software, you'd also get the greenhouse management software. So helping you with your planting schedules and basically being able to access our team of customer success experts and horticulture experts to help you build out that planting schedule, but also manage any problems that might come up and, be basically your guide to getting into this style of hydroponic and modular farming. So those were those 2 slides kind of cover the cost, of course, of the initial investment, but then also what potentially you'd be looking at in terms of your about $900 a week of operating expenses. Now you'd probably be curious on how does or what is the value of hyperlocal produce? And when I say value, I don't just mean the dollar amount, although of course, talking about the financials, that will be the main focus in the next few slides, but also, why potentially can it warrant a higher price point? So these are some of the advantages of hyperlocal produce. We say hyperlocal because in a lot of cases, local could be, some people, there's surveys that go Canada. Local produce to some people means grown in Canada. For example, folks in Ontario, they might be, if it's local, if it's grown in Ontario, but we all know Ontario is a pretty large province. And some people maybe just think it's within 100 kilometers. So hyperlocal is really something where, for example, you are growing it and maybe serving it in the vicinity of 100 feet or 100 meters. But just to kind of differentiate what we mean when we say hyperlocal. So it uses the hydroponic system that we use, the deep water hydroponics. It uses about 90% less water. Being able to vertically stack the shelves and grow crops essentially on top of each other significantly reduces the amount of land that's requires. It stays fresh longer. Basically, going back to some of those things about hyperlocal that I said with certain types of produce as well, if you keep the roots intact, the shelf life we've done tests on is significantly longer than something that's maybe already sat on a truck being imported from down south would look like. you're using a controlled and traceable environment. So at the end of the day, your customer is going to know that this, let's say it's a head of lettuce is grown right in this modular farm right here, and they know the person, aka yourself, who's growing it, which more and more people are seeing value in. We don't use or require any synthetic pesticides to manage the crops within our farm. The idea of hyperlocal maybe goes without saying, but I think it's important to highlight that it dramatically reduces the transportation required to bring your food to your table. It has that full nutritional value and great taste. So something that's much more freshly harvested. Anyone who here has maybe a background, not a background, excuse me, a backyard garden knows that when you harvest, whatever it might be, and you put it right into a salad, for example, you can really taste that difference. And then it supports your local economy, keeping the dollars, locally, supporting a local farmer, and it reduces food waste, but also packaging waste as well. In some of these cases, when you're selling it, almost right at the point of harvest, it requires less packaging, but of course, that's all up to how your project is structured. So setting a price. So some of the things that you're going to want to consider are your subscription size. So when I say subscription size, it means, how many units of produce, how many heads of lettuce or bunches of kale or herbs do you want to put in one of your subscription boxes? So like I mentioned, we will go into some scenarios, but these are things to think about. Do you want to have multiple subscription sizes? And then different price points for each one. In my experience, looking at some more local and organic farmers, you can see, they'll have a couples box, so one that's tailored a little bit more to the size of a single working couple or something like that. You also have like maybe a family size box, and then you could also maybe have an individual box for someone who lives alone but wants to tap into these sort of community supported agriculture subscription programs. Frequency would be another question I would ask myself when setting this up. So do I want to set up a weekly box? Is this going to be bi-weekly? Is it going to be kind of pay as you go and pick up as you can? Do you want to have a monthly box? All these things kind of play into how you do your bookkeeping. Maybe if you have to find a communal meetup site for your customers to pick it up rather than maybe being able to pick it up on your property. How often do you want to have to bring all your produce there to do that pickup? So these decisions can be made based on what's available to you in your local market and what the customers expect of you. And then the other thing is how you accept payment. To give you some background on sort of where the subscription model came from and why it's called community supported agriculture is because essentially at the beginning of a season for a traditional farm or a conventional farm, that's where the costs are the highest. That's where you're inputting everything into the land. That's where you have to buy your fertilizers, you have to buy your seeds. So the idea was to try and gain upfront payments from people who would basically be buying shares of your harvest that then they could collect at later parts of the year. So it would help the farmer cover their costs when they're the highest at the beginning of the season. And then those people kind of buy into shares of the farm harvest later in the year. So how you structure that, it can be, if you have a subscription where maybe someone prepays, and I'm just using this as an arbitrary number, $500 for a certain amount of weeks of farming or produce, excuse me, that's kind of guaranteed revenue that and then you just have to deliver on the product. You could also do pay as you go. You could do both. You could offer both. You could offer incentives to pay up front, maybe in the savings. So you can get kind of creative with these different things, but I thought it was important to highlight these three different ways of how you want to, not only set a price, but set up sort of the whole subscription model in terms of frequency and how much produce you're putting in each box that you're giving your customers. You go to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. So like I mentioned, these are some of the scenarios that we made. We built them fairly conservatively using our financial model that is built out, proven yields that we use in our research farm, as well as our existing farms. So again, in this, we use about a $20 per hour labor rate. We use about 13 cents per kilowatt hour in terms of your electricity cost. And then we always incorporate a loss factor because at the end of the day, it is farming. And even though we can control eliminate a lot of the environmental factors that could potentially contribute to crop loss, it still is farming. So we want to be overly conservative and have that loss factor built into the top line revenue. So in these scenarios, scenario one is offering what we would consider a large box. We set the price point at $20 to make it simple for the purpose of this exercise, to give you all an idea of what the financial breakdown would look like at a somewhat higher level. So the box size in this scenario, it would contain 6 types of produce. So this is based on our amount of planting slots. You'd be able to support about 75 weekly subscribers, which at that $20 box price point would be a just under $80,000 in top line annual revenue. You less your operating costs that we discussed earlier, about an average of $900, you'd be looking at about $31,000 in annual profit, which is somewhere in that 30-ish% of profit margin range. Scenario 2, you can have the small boxes. So, it's the $10 a box price. You'd have only 3 types of produce. Like what I mentioned earlier, you could maybe have, if you kind of realize in your market that that's going to be selling more, you can look to sell more of a smaller box. Your weekly subscribers in this scenario, you could support about 150. Again, the top line revenue is going to look the same weekly, and as well as the profit. And then scenario 3 is just to highlight the fact that you don't necessarily have to do one or the other. You can do both. We use 6 types of produce and 3 types of produce for the sake of these scenarios, but it really would come down to however you foresee it being the most successful in your area in terms of the customers and the market that you're looking to serve. But this is just a great exercise to give you a sense of what your annual revenue you could expect based on these, I would call them average prices, and then what your profit would ultimately be. Of course, you are not going to be tied down to any one of these scenarios. And this is sort of where the aspect of working with someone on our team to develop your project model and your financial model in greater detail would look like. Because the other thing that I don't want to, escape this is we don't expect you to immediately have, for example, 75 subscribers signed up to get 6 types of produce. Maybe you start off with 10 and build your way up. And in the meantime, of course, you still have to find other ways to sell your produce. And that's where, like Carly does, the hybrid model becomes very attractive. And you might always have a level of hybrid with your farm. You're not always tied down to having to have only be the subscriber mode of your of selling your produce. So Nia, you can go to the next slide. So overall, with some of these assumptions that we made, and we're building these financial models, your return on investment could be anywhere from about 5 to 7 years. And it will vary, like I mentioned. This is where you'd want to learn what your own specific ROI would look like based on your own operating costs, based on how much you would pay for labor. And of course, another factor that we could always talk about is if you're hiring someone, those are labor costs, but if you're working yourself, there's different ways where you could allocate that dollar amount for your time. But for the purpose, I guess, of this webinar, we wanted to give you a sense of what those top line, I guess, high level numbers would look like, and then how that would factor into ultimately getting your return on your investment. In the case of the scenarios we built, about 5 to 7 years is the timeline that we would expect. And now I think we have some time for questions. Thank you, Nia, for navigating me through those slides. I appreciate it.
No, awesome job, Nick, and thank you so much for sharing all of that. We're going to hop into some questions. Again, guys, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. We were able to put in any questions that you have, and I'll be going through them now with Nick, and some of you may have seen Stephanie's in there as well, answering a couple of questions for you guys. So our goal is to get through as many as we can. We have a good set of time allocated. And as Nick had mentioned, the best kind of next step is to chat with our team and find your specific ROI. So that's something that we'll be getting into how to do that right after this questions period. So stay tuned for that. And so, yeah, let's hop into the questions. There's quite a few here, Nick, so I'll just start going through. The first question that we have here that I think would be a good one to start out with is, what is the daily energy consumption of our farms? And is there a monthly water consumption? So is there some averages that we've seen?
Yeah, so the typical, I know for annual, the number on top of my head is about $60,000 kilowatt hours annually is typically what the unit would use. it will vary based on if you are in, you know, Toronto with the warmer summers and maybe the more fluctuating temperatures versus if you're in northern where maybe it's more consistently slightly on the colder side. But yeah, 60,000-ish kilowatt hours annually is the typical consumption. And then, sorry, Nia, what was the other aspect of that question? Was it water?
The water as well, please.
Yeah, so it's about 2,500 liters of water usage a month, 25 to 3,000.
Perfect. And we also had a question kind of building on that one about solar or wind renewable energies being able to be used with our farms.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a great question that we get all the time. So we as Growcer are not, I guess, in the business to say of, you know, supplying the solar or the wind energy, the technology to provide that. However, our farms can absolutely be adapted. Let's say you already have a solar infrastructure hooked up on your property or you have access to one. Our farms can absolutely plug into that type of power. It would just have to be done, you know, a feasibility study ahead of time. And again, that would be something where we'd work with you one-on-one, kind of in a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
No, perfect. And staying on the same veins of kind of clarifying questions around the farm specifically, what is the expected lifespan of a Growcer farm?
About 30 years. So we've actually recently, we used to use shipping containers and now we've actually increased our lifespan by building it from the ground up using SIP panels, so structurally insulated panel structure. And then, yeah, now it's basically rated for about a 30-year lifespan.
Awesome. And if we're going to have the lifespan of one farm, maybe we should look at more. So we have a question here about where to scale up. So if we got someone that started with one farm and they were adding additional ones, is it similar to the baseline overhead price for materials, or how exactly does it work if you wanted to scale up from more than just one farm?
Right. So if I'm understanding where this question is coming from, it'd be in the scenario of you already have a grocer, maybe it's been really successful for 1 year and you're looking at getting a second farm. In terms of the materials, it would still be the build on getting your farm, you know, manufactured and built and delivered to you. But because you'd already have a lot of the processes in place and you basically going through it for a second time, you would see definitely some more efficiencies in terms of just installing it. But also it would not necessarily be that exact same total startup cost for a second farm. Again, I don't want to go into the specifics of like how it would exactly compare in terms of prices, but it would be pretty fair for me to say that it would be less than the total investment for your second farm would be theoretically less than for your first, because you wouldn't have to do a lot of potentially like the site prep stuff that you did the first time when you got your first farm. But again, that could definitely be something too that you'd work out with the customer success team here at Growcer.
Awesome. And you had mentioned that we originally used containers and now we have switched. Could you just elaborate on that just a little bit more? Of if you know, like why or the benefits of.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, the containers were becoming harder and harder to get, and they're also not as reliable in terms of the actual integrity of them. So one thing we wanted to do is bring more of the capabilities for us to, you know, like for example, increase the lifespan of the farm and just make it more of a reliable, sturdy unit. We wanted to bring more of that capabilities. The word I would use would be in-house, so we have more control over it. Also, it's a 40-foot by 10-foot structure now, where before the containers are typically 40 feet by 8.5 feet. So it is, you know, somewhat significantly wider, which leaves room for more growing space or more room for people to work in. It also gave us a lot more control over the insulation. So we can be a little bit more flexible in terms of insulating something that's going to be in the far north versus, you know, like I mentioned earlier, something in Southern Ontario here, where obviously the climates are somewhat different. Those would be the main factors. And what I alluded to before as well would be that increase in lifespan. But if there are certain, you know, concerns or anything maybe that I don't address or I don't understand the question well enough, I'd encourage that person to, you know, reach out via email and we could definitely, you know, clarify anything.
For sure. And great response there. And in terms of now switching gears a bit, specifically to the math that we kind of referenced today, One question says the math shows around a 9-year ROI if we use the $31,000 in profit. So just a bit of background on how we got to the 5 to 7 year number.
Right. So the 5 to 7 year number, of course, it is a ballpark. And if you're looking at that $31,000 number, that would be based on like the Growcer farm. So I guess the capital investment of getting the farm, which should be about like we had shown about 210, just under 210,000 for the actual farm technology itself. But that's a really good point. If you're looking at like the total startup costs that we wanted to be very clear about, that payback's a little bit different, but we always want to base that return on investment on the capital cost in this scenario. And that's how we built them out because the costs other than the farm costs, I mean, some of them are definitely set in stone, but then others can be quite different. Like, the site prep can be anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 to $30,000 that we've seen, depending on what's available to you. So again, it's something that we can definitely build out a more custom model for those who are looking to do that using our financial projection tool or calculator that we have built out.
Perfect. And a question here is, do we have any contracts with grocery stores directly to aid in that sale? And then building on that, how do we avoid a direct competition with other grocer farms or between farms?
Great question. So we don't have like contracts per se with grocery stores looking to purchase produce. We've found that the most successful relationships, I guess it's the mentality of what I've said in the past is it's the mentality of, what's the expression? You feed a man a fish, he eats for a day, you teach a man a fish, he eats for a lifetime. So, with a business relationship, if at the end of the day, that grocery store is going to be your customer, we can provide, the necessary guidance on how to approach those conversations, the material about our farm and how we grow. But ultimately, we want you to build that relationship because they will be your customer. And if you have that relationship built, we found that it's just ultimately going to lead to a longer standing and most likely more lucrative and better relationship for you for the long run. The second question, I kind of forgot.
Oh, good. It's how do we try to minimize, or what are the practices we have in place in terms of competition between farms?
Oh, right. So, great question. So, of course, we will be very much aware of where our farms are going and we'll be totally upfront about it. And the last thing we would want to do is pit our customers against each other. I can say we haven't had an issue with grocer farms competing with each other yet to date. And it's something that we're always going to want to avoid. And I mean, being totally honest, I don't know if I have an exact answer to say this is what we would do, but I can assure you that it would be something that we would work out and it would be paired in with that ongoing support that we are able to provide. So we would, again, I mean, bottom line is that we would not want to pit, two grocer farms against each other competing for the same business.
Exactly. And I'm seeing some really number specific questions in the chat, just because right now, Nick and I are on the Zoom. It might be a little bit harder to really dive into those details. So if you have specific questions on the numbers, we will be following up not only with just the slides here, but also we've created a one pager that gives you a full financial breakdown and gives you additional background. So you can have tangible words to what Nick has said today written in that one document on background on specific numbers. So that will all be provided to you after the webinar. So we're going to try to address as many questions regarding the numbers as we can during this session. But for really specific ones, it just might be easier once you kind of like have that sheet, it's easier to review. And then Nick and I can follow up with you as well on a one-on-one basis. So just want to address that just so everyone knows we're not trying to avoid any questions. It's just some of them might be a little bit harder to break down really specific number spaces. Additional questions that I'm seeing here and ones that I think would be good to cover would be in terms of our subscription. It says we have one that's if it's based on 75 subscribers is the total amount available on a weekly basis. So is the number that we've given as the 75, is that all the produce that is available every week, or is there different flexibilities?
Right, no, so in this scenario, basically what we did was typically on a weekly basis, you could expect about 500 mature heads of produce grown. So In that scenario, like I mentioned earlier, we'd have that 10% loss factor. So 10% of that, we just want to account for potentially being lost due to basically just the inherent risks of farming in general, to be conservative. So then that number is just about would be the max amount of weekly subscribers that you could get with only a slight amount of overflow of other produce. We also kept these numbers to try and make it easier for us to get the message across in terms of what they would look like. We wanted to keep them as simple as possible, but there's definitely scenarios like if you have an idea that you could have, maybe 60 subscribers, but then what will you do with the end of produce and how much actually would be left over? I mean, of course, it would depend on what variety you're going to be growing as well. I mean, it's very easy for us to kind of make a model and say, look, you're only growing lettuce. Well, the reality is that, I mean, I don't think any current grocer farmers only grow one variety. They will grow multiple. And that's where it just becomes a little bit too cumbersome to create that many different scenarios in terms of the crop mixes that we put in the container. So yeah, I mean, I might sound like a broken record here, but that would absolutely be something that we'd want to look at on a more personal basis, I guess, to help you figure out what that would look like.
No, for sure. And I think that that's kind of one of the key things that we do emphasize. We really do want to work with each project one-on-one. It's not just like a farm and here you go. And we want to make sure that we're really with you throughout that. And building on that same thing, it would be, does Growcer provide technical support to help with growing the various types of veggies? So our systems are multi-crop. There's a lot of different produce growing within that farm. How do we help determine kind of the ideal lighting and nutrients if we're growing lettuces and spinaches and varieties in our farms?
Yeah, great question. Totally valid concerns too. And essentially you'd be in the hands of our customer success and horticulture experts. So we'd be able to make those recommendations. If you had a certain crop mix of, let's say, 4 to 5 crops that you wanted to put in the system, our team would provide recommendations on all those things, what your lighting cycle would be, based on how much you want to sell of each variety, what the planting schedule might look like, as well as what you'd want to set the temperature of the farm to, what type of nutrients, what levels you want to put into the farm. All those things we'd be able to work out with you. We take a lot of that work on your behalf. And that's where the level of support that we provide allow us to work towards our mission of allowing anybody, regardless of where they are, what their experience is, to be able to grow produce all year round.
Perfect. And then another question would just be in terms of warranties around our farm. So I know that we said our farms have a 30-year lifespan, but there's obviously different parts within our farm and various warranties. So if you could just give a bit more of a breakdown on that.
For sure, yeah. So there are warranties on specific different parts. The details of each one would take too long to go over a call or a webinar like this. But yes, there are warranties on specific parts in the system like pumps and lights, but they're all going to look different. And when building out financial models for these types of things too, in order to account for, the having to replace something down the road is, it's a piece of equipment, things will fail. We'd want to allocate maybe like 1 or 2% of the farm, if that's what you choose, to setting some of that money aside to account for those things. But ultimately, when it comes to the warranty, there's definitely a 1-year warranty on our build. So in that first year, where the support is highest, we also back the product for sure. And then there's specific warranties that go beyond that, which we can definitely, hash out more details as we go further along in the process of you wanting to start your farm.
Another question that we have here is if our farms can be placed indoors, and just a bit of background on kind of like, does that affect then the HVAC of our farms?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, like if you're talking about putting in like a barn or a warehouse, I don't see why not. I guess my question would be, because they are able to just be outside and they're able to be exposed to the Canadian elements, for example, on both the summer and winter seasons, I would question, why do that when you could save your space inside for maybe other operations like packaging or something? I don't know. It's an interesting question. As to my knowledge, I don't think any of our farms right now are like inside another building because they are built to be, modular and turnkey in a sense. But yeah, I mean, if that person has a specific reason why, I'd encourage them to reach out via email, and I'd love to talk to them about it.
Yeah, that's a great point in terms of kind of the packaging is, as you said, like in terms of once you have the farm and you have the produce, there are tasks such as packaging and then also produce storage that do require a bit of an indoor space. So that is another great way that you could use that.
Yeah, and if it's the only space available to you, then yeah, I guess so, as long as, it can fit in the building. We are talking about a 40-foot by 10-foot structure too, so.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of, I know you had mentioned our production software. Could you give a bit more background on kind of what it helps with or what it entails, and how that can kind of help you as a farmer?
Yeah, so it's like your total greenhouse management software, and that pairs with the remote monitoring as well. So being able to just monitor and control and automate the actual environment inside the farm. So your temperature, your lighting cycle, your humidity, and then the software itself is able to help you generate a planting schedule. So if you have a few different varieties you want to grow at certain volumes, you can plug those in and create planting schedules. So you're keeping on track to when you need your harvest the most. The remote monitoring as well enables you to, the example I always use is, let's say you are at the end of the week and you forget to close the door in the middle of the winter, you would get notified on your phone or whatever device is connected to the software that the temperature is dropping in the system. So it's a little bit of added peace of mind for you when you are not directly around the farm, but ultimately the software is there to just help you manage the farm. So it also goes into creating tasks for you that kind of pairs into the like the harvesting and planting schedule. So if you come in on a Monday, you would have something that basically tells you what tasks need to be done for that particular day and shift. Is it a harvest day? Do you have to just do some regular maintenance and cleaning and uptake? Do you have to plant a new rack? All those things can be generated for you using that software, as well as with the support of our team.
Perfect. As we're just getting into like the last 10 minutes, I think I'm just going to quickly hop on to our next steps and just go over them at a high level. And that way, if there's any questions about those or any kind of remaining questions, we can do those for the last 5 minutes. So I'm just going to pop back over and share my screen once again, everyone. And we are just going to look at what some next steps are. And additionally, if you would like the ROI of your project calculated, how we're going to be able to do that and help you out with that. So if you head over to the growcer.ca/ROI, you'll be able to input that information specific to your project. Because as Nick has mentioned, that's kind of the key. The numbers we provided today are at a high level of what you can expect. But if you want the numbers specifically based on if you were operating your own farm in your own community, this is where you would submit that information. We would be looking for the power rate in your community, so we know how much energy your farm would be using and at what cost, the labor costs, and additionally specifically, and as Nick had mentioned as well, as it impacts your ROI, if you'll be the one running the farm or if you'll be hiring someone. And then additionally, the local prices of produce. So looking at your local market, what are similar produce types to what we offer in our farms and you'd be selling to your customer? What are those retailing for? And you can kind of gauge, as Nick also went into, the produce that you'd be offering out of your container farm is a value add just due to the fact that it's grown hydroponically. And so seeing kind of what the current prices are and how you could kind of keep that competitive edge in your market, what are the produce prices that you'd like to list? So yes, as said, it's the growcer.ca/ROI. You can head over there to look at that. And then we'll also include a link to it. And additionally, these instructions that were provided in our follow-up email for the session. And if you have any questions specifically regarding this page, don't hesitate to put them in the chat because Nick and I can address them before the webinar ends and making sure that everyone's good to go to complete that next step. Nick, is there anything you would want to add to that or anything that I didn't cover? I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Sorry. No, I said, I think you put it very well and recapped it well.
Perfect. And then additionally, as I stated at the beginning, and as probably upon registering, many of you realize we are actually part of a webinar series. So this week we went into the numbers and next week we'll be kind of going into completing a market assessment in order for you to plan your business, see where you fit into your local market, recruit members and what kind of retention strategies are as well. So there's a couple questions here. And again, we'll include this in the follow-up email as well if you want to prep for next week's webinar. But we will also hop back over to the Q&A and answer any of those remaining questions that people may have for that last little bit. But as we said, just wanted to make sure that everyone had time to kind of look at that, what the next steps are, and if there's any question regarding those specifically. But I'm just going to hop back into the Q&A here and see if there's anything else that we can address in the last few minutes that we have here today. And thank you again for everyone for joining us. And we want to see you in the next 2 weeks. And additionally, there is a feedback survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. So just want to hint at that too, because we want to make sure to get your feedback on this session, as we always want to keep implementing it and improving as we go into the subsequent weeks. I think a good question for us to cover here would be, we've had questions about different markets that are using our farms, whether it be this model or I know we mentioned a few other ones. So we had a question about if any, this one is about if there are nonprofit organizations using our farms, then also for-profit organizations, and kind of how what models we've seen in common being used between.
Yeah, does I mean, it would be both are being used. So yes, there is a model for nonprofits that meet, maybe food security goals or whatever the mandates of their organization might be. You can use the Growcer in creative ways, not only just providing, healthy, locally grown produce, but also educational opportunities, exposure to a new innovative technology. So there's definitely ways that you can have a self-sufficient, maybe a model where I think the question might have alluded to was, getting like a funding for it, covering the overall cost, but then having a model where you can sell enough produce to keep the operation going and then maybe donate it. So that's absolutely, an option. But for the purpose of like this food subscription box or from a for-profit angle, absolutely there are retail grocery stores using Growcer systems. So that whole concept of hyper local, especially from the consumer perspective, is becoming more and more important. So, a shopping experience where you can go and buy a head of romaine that was grown, right outside of the store and potentially harvested that morning, is something that the Growcer technology is enabling retailers to do. So yes, I mean, the simple answer would be it's both used by like a nonprofit model and a for-profit model.
Perfect. And again, kind of a bit more background on our customers. Someone had asked for institutions, aside from just universities, what are some conditions for success? So what are something that institutions are looking into when they're looking to use this model?
Like institutions like school, other than universities, you said? So like
it says universities or like smaller, smaller, but schools with younger children, like elementary or middle schools.
Yeah, models for success. Is that was kind of the question? Like what?
Just in conditions for success for those type of organizations.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it would be because first and foremost, maybe this is obvious, but having a very clear goal for the project. So is it to create an educational opportunity? Is it to supply the food service at the hospital or at the university? Is it to do a combination of both? Like having a very clear goal for the project ultimately, I'd say that would be paramount. And I mean, that goes for all projects, but I would say especially with something where, maybe the goal could be a little bit confused with others. Also having a very committed and engaged team. So someone who we'd call, a champion on the ground from your end, who's very open and responsive to working with your team that would be representing you here at Growcer and helping get that project off the ground. So, going through some of that stuff around developing your business case, your business model, preparing the site, organizing installation, things like that. But then ultimately someone who's committed to continuing to run the system and make sure it stays operational and stays pumping out produce as consistently as possible. And
awesome.
Yeah, sorry if that's kind of vague and obvious, but I'd say, from my experience working with folks, I think that sets a really, really, really strong foundation for successful projects moving forward.
Definitely. I think it's in the planning stages that the success of the project is really solidified. The execution, obviously, yes, is very important as well. But I think having a good plan going into the execution is really what the key is, and a good team supporting and backing a project and the goal that's been communally decided, I think, is definitely across the board where we've seen the most success with projects.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And we're just going to go into our last few questions here. And a reminder that our next sessions, I see a couple questions here about marketing or the use of social media, that will for sure be covered in next week's session. And I think even a little bit in the one after about the logistics kind of around communication. So I just want to make sure to clarify that maybe that won't be covered this week, but for sure in the upcoming sessions, that's the key focus there. I'm just going to look through for a good final question. A question that we had was around the usage of nutrients in our system. So what exactly are these nutrients, and what kind of are the requirement, and are they pesticides? What is kind of, if you can provide any additional background around those?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So the nutrients that we use for our system is mainly just a standard nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium mix, so an NPK mix. We also have a nutrient that helps with root health, as well as one that helps control the pH of the water to promote plant growth. The details of those, I'd encourage you to reach out. In terms of like what exact, if you're looking for like a brand, or you're looking for like really the exact contents of it, I'd be happy to maybe help you out there. But the bottom line is, yeah, it's a, what's the word I'm looking for? Is it proprietary or not proprietary? It's not specific to Growcer. It's just a standard hydroponic solution for the water that you could likely pick up at your local like hydroponic gardening store, is what I'm trying to get across there. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're just right upon 2 o'clock, so we'll end it here. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining. Thanks for the great questions in the chat. As we said, we'll be providing you with the recording, the slides, a one-pager highlighting everything that was covered today, as well as any things that we referenced. I know we referenced kind of our virtual farm tours and past webinars that we've done. Those will all be included in the email as well as the next steps in terms of completing your ROI of your own specific project, as well as what we can kind of expect for next week. So looking forward to seeing you all next Tuesday around the business planning and marketing aspects. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us this week. Again, by end of day tomorrow at the latest, you will have a full recording and everything that we kind of mentioned today. And thank you again, Nick, for being here and helping out. And Nick and I are really glad to be here with everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Nia. Well done. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. And yeah, if there's some follow-up questions that we didn't address, then yeah, just let us know. I think the email might have been in the chat at some point too. So
for sure. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.